Welcome to On the Wake Up Radio. This is Truth, Freedom, and Sophia with your host, Sophia. Shout out to super producer Cindy Ashby. All of our shows are live on onthewakeupradio.com. Also catch replays on SoundCloud, Google, and Apple, Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, at On the Wake Up Radio. Also support us at PayPal/onthewakeupradio@gmail.com. Also, check out our new website, otwtube.com. That's where all of our videos will be uploaded. You can watch all of them uncensored. We're on Cash App with $ on the Wake Up Radio. And again, find us at onthewakeupradio.com. Tonight, my guest is someone who's second time comer. He's coming back. We didn't get to fully finish last time, and he's just full of all kinds of knowledge that I think everyone should hear. His name is Jack Cary, and he's the founder of Paranormal Intelligence Agency. He has the website paranormalintelligenceagency.com, and he is current director of the Crypto Fort Connors. Jack Cary is a regular guest on Ancient Civilizations, Deep Space and Open Minds, a documentary series produced by Gaia. So, Jack, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming back. I really appreciate it a lot.
Oh, it's fun.
So I feel like we should get right into it because we were already kind of chatting right before, and we're already talking about so many interesting things. Recently, your most recent video that you had uploaded to your channel on YouTube, Paranormal Intelligence Agency, it was about Antarctica and Mars. And wow, people don't realize the connections and the fact that we already have a Mars colony. There's tons of evidence to prove that. There's bases in Antarctica. The snow's melting there. The ice is melting there. Things are being revealed. So let's start it out. Where do you want to begin?
It sounds good to me. Well, the Antarctica mystery I did explain in a recent radio show or podcast I do on Beyond Explanation channels called Paranormal Planet. And I traced the mystery from evidence from a civilization on Mars to where it looks like they colonized in Antarctica. And there's a huge amount of evidence that I present for that theory. Now, like you talked about, the ice melt coming down in Antarctica it's starting to reveal quite a few structures that can no longer be hidden from satellite imagery. The government's tried to scrub, photographs in the past, but I think after what they've been going through in Antarctica, and it seems to have gone back to the 1980s at least, is such an extensive archaeological find, now involving so many scientists, that I think they're going to include it in their ongoing UFO disclosure efforts.
The UFO disclosure that they're kind of starting, do you feel we're going to get an authentic disclosure, or are we going to, a full rollout here, or you think they're going to do like a total slow drip where we're just going to have to get little bits over time?
Right. Well, and there's a couple of different scenarios by which that can take place. The fact that they released those authentic video sequences from the radars of they were the most advanced fighter jets that we can have. And they were the highest trained pilots who were filming them. They have been interviewed on mainstream media time after time now about the experience. This is all history-making type of stuff. Never before has the public been allowed to see military footage of a UFO. Now, I think that one of those UFOs, it performed a maneuver that required 1,348 Gs. And that completely nullifies our idea of Newtonian physics completely.
And that's the one where it was kind of spinning. It had something kind of in the middle, and it just went and flipped the other way.
Yeah, there's two of them. That's called the gimbal UFO. And that's where the pilot's like, wow, it's rotating. Yes. And then the other one is of a Tic Tac UFO that is moving so fast that the radar system could barely keep up with it on a state-of-the-art fighter jet. Interestingly enough, there's been eyewitnesses on a couple of battleships. One's the Nimitz primarily. They've had a number of sailors who were, serving during the time period where a lot of this was happening, and the Nimitz was having other types of UFO incidents. And even those guys have now appeared on major television shows to tell their story. And what they told was that these craft were not only performing impossible maneuvers, but they came down and entered into the ocean. And then from there, they said hundreds of knots underwater. And to explain to people what that means is, I served on a nuclear submarine, and I know how fast some of those torpedoes can go. And the fastest known torpedo is one built by the Russians, and it can go about 200 knots an hour. These guys are reporting 600-700 knots an hour. Physics will not allow that kind of what they call water cavitation or water displacement beyond a certain amount. So whatever technology they were using during that period is clearly not human. Then these craft entered out of the ocean and flew away at what they call instant hypersonic speed. So they experienced anti-gravitic effects. And right now, in like programs like ATIP that was put on by the Pentagon, and it was headed by Luis Elizondo. In their analysis, there were three things that identify these craft. One is transmedium travel, air to water, back to air. Number two is anti-gravitic effects. So it seems to be able to hover in air with no known propulsion system. And number three is instantaneous hypersonic velocity. There is no buildup in the speed. It simply appears from A to point B. And that kind of speed also can't be reproduced. So it's interesting that we're getting that disclosure, and at the same time, we're getting a lot of what I call OSINT, or open source intelligence service, indications that a lot of new news is about to come out of Antarctica.
I know you talk about Cliff High a lot in the Webbot and stuff, and I follow you closely on Twitter and Facebook. So it's all interesting. Do they think that there are actual people in these crafts, or do you think there are actual pilots in these crafts, or is that just impossible no matter what technology you have to have pilots craft moving that fast?
Right. I'm of the firm belief, along with a lot of other researchers, that most of these craft are unpiloted drone craft like we have. But imagine an artificial intelligence that's maybe 1 billion years older than us. And it would basically make these craft autonomous, self-thinking, self-replicating types of machinery. And I think that they're sent here with my unified field theory of paranormal activity. These would be introduced from a type 3 society across entire planetary systems that they've seeded and eventually come back to harvest into their society. And I think these craft show up here from some vast distance away. They perform a singular function, a testing of some kind, sampling, and then they fly back to wherever it is that they're being sent from. Everything on this planet's being tested down to the molecular level. And you're talking about an alien presence that's been here so long and has invested such effort into whatever this long-term program is, that we can be rest assured that it's not just them with a simple curiosity.
Well, even look at the Rendlesham incident, the binary code, and that was decoded and what that said. And there was definitely no pilot in that craft. That was a communication through binary code. And I mean, I still don't even understand binary code. And I've been following these stories for like at least 20 years, for a really long time, since I was a teenager. And how is that? How does that binary code work? Like when he touched the UFO and he got that download, it couldn't get out of his mind. He was writing it down, and then they give it to someone to decode.
Yeah, you know, and that's one of the most fascinating things about the Rendlesham incident was the fact that he received the message in binary code, meaning that whatever intelligence was behind it was confident that even if it was written down, someone would be able to decipher it here. They had that much awareness in this probe. When that message was decoded, it had some pretty interesting messages on there. And what fascinates me is that the binary code seems to, without any manipulation, equate to English words. It's like they understood the one code led to the other, but they didn't choose English words or anything in his head. But when the message says, for continuous planetary advance as being one of the main sentences there, I think therein you see a real glimpse at the motive of what I call this Type 3 civilization. A lot of people believe it was a time-traveling craft of some kind, but time travel does exist because space travel exists, and space and time are the same fabric.
So now let's talk about Mars and how, we'll put it in the words of like the Anunnaki, how that could have been a civilization, more than likely was, that destroyed their own planet and then came here.
Yeah, so through a very long chain of evidence that I've collected from a lot of different sources that have no real known connection between one another, but all seem to be pointing and possessing pieces of the same puzzle. And one of these groups is a highly, probably the most highly and respected group of remote viewers anywhere on the planet. That's at Farsight Institute, headed by Dr. Courtney Brown. That being said, there are 2 or 3 historical accounts of CIA-trained remote viewers who were given the same target and came up with almost identical results. And that was way back in like the 1970s. So that amazes me. But in short, without causing an hour-long story, what appears to have happened was that the Anunnaki, which are recorded, in Samaria, but they were also recorded by other names all over the world, were here mining out the Earth's natural resources and had been for a while. It appears as though, as the Farsight group calls it, a war in heaven occurred. Now, they think that this so-called war in heaven became mythologized and encapsulated in all the world's mythologies because that's how big of a battle that it was.
Quick interruption. Would you say like the Mahabharata would be describing that?
Yes,
Okay.
for sure.
Okay.
And a lot of other too, like there's some wood carvings from like 14th century Germany and stuff like that that seem to depict these big battles taking place. But in their summation, basically, they determined that Anunnaki were actually attempting to also take the natural resources from Mars because their planet was in such desperate situation. And that caused a major conflict because there was already a sentient, intelligent species on Mars with their own advanced civilization. This ensued into a war. That war resulted in at least 2 nuclear explosions, and those have been identified by Dr. John Brandenburg, a NASA scientist. Now, they left vast amounts of xenon-129 all over Mars, and that can only be produced through nuclear warfare. So they've detected that. Now, the remote viewers believe that right before the decimation, because they were losing the war, and right before the planet was completely decimated, their scientists were somehow able to build a weapon that the remote viewers called a planet killer. And as a one last desperate effort, they launched it, and it hit its target, which people call today Nibiru. In ancient times, it was also called Malbec in different cultures. And it literally destroyed Nibiru to the point where it became the asteroid belt. That's how much it got destroyed. There was nothing left. It's interesting to note that when all of the Anunnaki ascended back from the Earth, I presume to go back to their planet to help fight the war, they left a group of Anunnaki here that they believe had deceived them and believed that they had gone against the word of the supreme leader. His name was Anu, after the word Anunnaki. That's what it is, the people of Anu. And they were called the Great Assembly. And so they marooned them here on Earth forever. And I remind people, what if you were a castaway and you wound up on a desert island with no people, and you have no tools, no technology, no medical, literally nothing at your disposal? What would you build? What could you build?
Yeah.
What could you build? Well, that was the same scenario left to these, what I call the fallen Anunnaki. And so what they did was they went around and began to build structures that they knew would last the test of time and would conceal within them mathematical equations, which would lead us to a much higher understanding of the cosmos. Now, the Martians had to build space arcs and travel to the nearest habitable planet, and that's us. And apparently back at this particular point, Antarctica was a very viable space to live. In fact, it may have been the best. And that's
Don't they have a whole forest under there?
Entire forest that was flash frozen, basically. And they've got a valley there, which is, I think they said, twice as deep as the Grand Canyon and twice as long. And it has warm steam water running through it. So,
what a place that must be. Incredible.
Can you imagine? And so they landed there, excuse me, and they were able to rebuild what looks like, with these archaeological excavations, to be at least a rudimentary example of what their civilization was like. Imagine you can only pack so many things to take with you to try to replicate. And it's right about that time that it appears as though a vast catastrophe took place. And whether it was another ice age, a cometary impact, we just don't know. But in the course of just a couple of days, Antarctica became completely frozen over, and everybody and everything there perished. Now, I believe that this caused a diaspora of these Martian beings who had elongated skulls. We know that because we've got some insiders who went through Linda Moulton Howe, who produced plenty of documentation to prove who they were. And they claimed that these excavations revealed bodies that had elongated skulls. So now through this, what I believe and a lot of others is that Antarctica was Atlantis.
I always figured that too.
Yeah. And the Perry Ray map is one of those evidences, but I'll get to that. This diaspora, it leads to the Middle East, it leads to Africa, it leads to South America. It literally goes around to 6 different continents we have recorded humans attempting to use ritual head binding to alter the skulls of their children to emulate what they refer to as divine beings.
And I just want to interject for a second, too. This isn't just like Jack's theory, by the way. This has produced physical evidence. There are bodies that have had DNA testing done with elongated skulls, Maria, and then is that in Nazca? Is that where those?
Yes, outside of Nazca.
So I just want to make sure I hit that hard, that people know that this is real evidence, not just saying, you know, oh, this is what we think. This is real produced physical evidence.
Right. And as always, people can follow along, and they can literally search engine just about everything I'm telling them, and do their own research, which I highly encourage. I think the more people do that, the better. But what we end up having out of this diaspora is this ritual head binding of trying to emulate what each of these cultures consider to be a divine being or royalty of some kind. That can't happen in 6 continents simultaneously without a cause and effect. Now, I go over, like you're mentioning, to what are called the Paracas skulls in Paracas, Peru. And they have many of them, and they've been extensively tested. DNA, you name it.
X-rays, CAT scans, everything.
Everything. And so these Paracas skulls don't have any signatures of ritual head binding. What they have is apparently a DNA genetic, which allowed them to grow human skulls 25% larger. And I'm talking about the internal cranium capacity. Now, the weight of the skulls were 60% heavier than a normal human being because of the sheer density. Of the bone. Now, that kind of density of bone usually occurs in environments of less gravity, because you can carry the weight so much easier, which is very interesting. But these skulls, some of them still have the hair on their heads. They're remarkably preserved. If you look them up, you'll be blown away. Also, I have a video on my YouTube channel fully talking about them. So there's a man named Brian Forrester who's been examining these things for at least 11, 12 years. And they've had the DNA examined. And what's amazing to me is, just like the mummies that they discovered in Nazca, Peru, that you brought up with the elongated skulls, these things too only proved to have 25% human-like DNA. It wasn't exactly human, but that was the closest structure that they could compare it to. The other 75% was completely not recorded before. They had no reference for it.
Wow.
The same exact thing happens with the Paracas skulls. 25% human-like DNA, 60% of the skull capacity. You go to Nazca, exactly the same thing.
So there's a clear distinguishment between head-binded skulls and these unique skulls. They have all these, extra room, heaviness.
Exactly. And one of the major things that anthropologists have cued on to, and there have been some viable scientists go down and take a look at them, is that in humans you have what's called a sagittal suture. It runs this way and it separates these 2 lobes. These creatures do not possess a sagittal suture, which is impossible in any human being. It's just part of our natural processes.
When you're born, you have the soft spot. That's the suture closing right there.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Wow. Now let's talk about the faith in Antarctica, because I've been told by every single person I've showed that to that, no, that's fake. And I go, you people just think I would say like, hey, this is a real thing.
That's funny. No, that picture was actually was verified, because when somebody releases something on Reddit chat boards, there's 1,000 people that immediately try to discredit it. And the Netherlands group of people who are actually ufologists and always are looking for stuff, came across that and released it that second. They were like, "Oh my God!"
Incredible.
Along with the actual Google coordinates. And I put that up a long time ago when it was there, and everybody could get on there and see it. Now it looks like a gray square that Google has put over the top of it.
Wow, really? So if
Yeah.
you go there and type in those coordinates now, you can't. That's
You,
a
you
square.
probably see kind of a gray over of it.
Wow.
I haven't done it in a while, but people should go look and see if it's still there. Now, it was happening during a really strong snowstorm, and you can see it blowing off the face,
Yeah.
and that was what was revealing it. So,
And it's definitely not shadow. It was a clear as day face, and it looked
mhm.
exactly like those beings. And now, Jack, also, I just keep bringing up that video you shared last week that you made, because it's really interesting, because you had the depictions of the fleshed out faces of what
Yes.
beings would have looked like, with the skulls and everything. And it's incredible. It truly is incredible. But I kind of want to transition now, because Mars colony right now, Elon Musk is talking about Mars. He's trying to get there by 2024, all this. So what's going on? We already have a colony that's already been there. What do you got to say?
Right. And what's really interesting to me is what's going to happen here in the short future. So what appears to have happened is that a group of elite people who were associated with the war industrial complex in the United States and black budget programs were connected to a think tank who believed that they only had three alternatives to fix overpopulation on the planet. Alternative 3 was the clandestine colonization of space, and that's what I provide evidence for up to that point. And then we've got a lot of other corroboratory, circumstantial, but very convincing circumstantial evidence of hackers like Gary McKinnon, who was able to hack into the NSA and NASA computers, downloaded a list of what was listed as non-terrestrial officers, along with two ships that were large and which nobody has ever been shown in public. The United States has been trying to extradite him from that point until now, and they've always failed. Then you have Laura Magdalene Eisenhower coming out, the great-granddaughter of President Eisenhower. She was involved with an intelligence agent at the time who was in the program and attempted to recruit her to a secret Mars colony program. Now, Dr. Brown at Farsight is always looking for blind targets to give to his viewers to see if they can pick up what it is. I don't know if your audience knows, but none of these targets are ever known to the viewers beforehand, before their results, and then they compare the two. So he basically found a photograph in JPL Laboratories archives, and then the photograph, it clearly shows two gigantic domes, and one of them has a pipe, and it's spewing this liquid, and it's all clear as can be. So he took that photograph and he made one dome target A, second dome target B, and then the spray coming out as a target C. And the most amazing part of all of that, and it was done by like 5 viewers and they all came out with the same results, was that they detected humans inside of those domes. They detected that they were in a state of distress and that they needed some sort of replacement parts for their equipment. They stated that they were messing with a kind of technology they could barely comprehend. And interestingly, of all, every one of them to a T said that it was a hardship duty. Now, in the military, when they say hardship duty, it means you're never coming back. These people volunteered for a one-way ticket to Mars as a way of trying to grab a toehold for humanity before these groups like the Alternative 3 group, which really were called the Club of Rome, before they became correct, and we began to, use up all the resources and breed ourselves into extinction level and stuff like that. That was their purpose. Now, what's interesting is that we now have this other space force who have zero idea that this other clandestine space force even exists.
I know. I think about that constantly.
Yeah,
I really do.
Yeah, and how those two are going to figure each other out and do it in such a way that it doesn't explode into public view, that all of their tax money's been used on a program that they never appropriated for.
The missing $2.3 trillion.
Yeah, 2.3 trillion, and Rumsfeld had a big conference September 10th. He was talking all about it. The GAO accounting office, which is the IRS for black budget programs in the United States, held all the records for that in an office in the Pentagon. And I'm not a conspiratorialist, but the one place in the Pentagon that got hit was the office that contained all the records for where we would have found the 2.3 missing trillion dollars.
And boils my blood. Well, not really, but in a way, when you really think about it, you start going in that thought down all those thoughts, and you think about all of it, and then you start kind of getting your blood boiling. Yeah. But now I want to ask you this, because it just popped in my head for some reason. That Black Hawk satellite that they say is up there. Who do you think that belongs to?
The Black Knight.
Black Knight. Sorry.
No worries. It's been something that I have wondered about my entire career as an investigator. The fact that it's been out there that long leads me to believe that that's some sort of it's a way of judging progress on a planet. So in other words, whenever it picks up certain signals of certain types of technology that have been developed, that signal goes back to whoever it is that's actually controlling this planet, and they can get constant readings.
Yeah, it's probably taking measurements of the Earth, the chemical measurements, all of that.
Right, because any other long-term running program, and that thing's been up there for as long as we can detect it, doesn't make much sense, because I don't think aliens need super high-def photos from a satellite to the ground.
Yeah, right.
Which would have been a whole other reason.
So now my next curious question would be, I actually got this from you too, and I'm thinking about the videos of the Russian video footage of ETs. What's the deal between Russia, and I also am going to ask you how you feel about I forget his name, him coming out recently talking about the Galactic Federation. The guy, the Israeli I think he was in the military or something for Israel. No. Even mention that guy.
Thank you.
No, God, no. I never liked him ever. I just immediately, whenever he would pop into things, I would just be like, something about him.
Oh, the first time I heard him talk at Gaia, I looked over at my producer, which was Jay Widener, which was his producer, and I rolled my eyes and I said, if these guys don't produce some physical evidence ASAP, you got a time bomb. And guess what they had? Boom!
I didn't know the guy was...
Too funny.
It's nuts, but no, I was talking about the Israeli. He was a ex-intelligence for Israel. He came out saying there was a galactic federation, and that links to Eisenhower as well, great-grandfather.
Right.
Dwight Eisenhower. So I was just curious of what you thought about that, if that's part of the Type 3 civilization.
I would think it would have to be. A galactic federations obviously would have to be connected to what Fermi would have referred to as civilizations that could be billions of years old and are so far beyond even these groups of aliens that I think that they probably have control over them. Now, a galactic federation, I don't know about. I do know from a lot of abductee accounts, and I've read thousands of them, because in the end, we know what the craft outside look like, it's not a mystery anymore. What we need to know is what's happening inside the craft, because what's happening there determines motive, and motive should determine our response. But as far as there being 5, 6 different types of aliens, all, being different and coming here, no, I believe that they're all under the same underlying authority, and probably each one of them performs a different function.
Wow, that's a good explanation. What was I going to just ask you? It was in regards to Valiant Thor. That's what I wanted to ask you. Yeah. That's what well, you got you. I'm going to ask you everything.
Yeah.
Is that a real? That's a real story. Is that true?
There every indication that the photographs of Valiant Thor in those meetings are completely authentic, that nobody's ever detected any sort of manipulation in them, which leads me to believe that at least some elements of the stories that are being told about him are true. The biggest problem I have with the whole scenario is that anybody that was super, super highly intelligent wouldn't have gone with the name Valiant Thor.
Yeah, I see. That's what I think turns it off, and it makes me think that there probably was someone, and to make it seem like not real, they give it these quirky names.
Yeah, and make sure may have to plug my computer in here in a minute.
No problem.
But it's interesting because when you look at the pictures of Valiant Thor in these groups, and there's pictures of him like sitting in a pew and stuff at a meeting, all the other people are looking at him, and he doesn't look right. There's something weird about his bone structure. It shows him from the left side, so his ear kind of looks strange. It's, when you look at that picture, I think to myself, there's got to be something to this, and I just can't figure out quite what it was.
And he said he was a Venusian, correct? Like they lived in the inner one of the moons, or where did he say he came from?
In Venus, I believe.
In Venus, okay,
Yeah.
inside of Venus. Yeah, wow. I hope someday that's the disclosure I want, because I don't need disclosure. I already know they exist.
Right.
And I'd still like to know like the root of it all, but those are the things I really I'm curious about. My husband, him and his whole family in the 70s saw a UFO on the highway. The whole highway stopped here in Massachusetts. And he said it looked like a giant office building in the sky.
Yeah.
Like, that's what he
heard. That and
big. Yeah. And I said, wow, you're my man.
Yep. It's old. Let me grab my plug-in. I'll be right back.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Oh, I love this conversation, huh? This is a great convo, because these are the things we need to talk about. And these are the things we need to pressure our government into letting us know. I'm not buying the, oh, people will go crazy if we tell the truth excuse anymore. I'm not buying it. It's not doing it for me. I think if people are going to go crazy, let them. We got to hold the whole civilization back, got to hold us all back from spiritual evolvement, from technological evolvement, because a few people might go crazy. I'm not buying it. No way. Hope you guys are all listening, hope you guys listening are all enjoying this conversation. Thank you so much. Remember to listen on thewakeupradio.com and check out otwtube.com. That's where all of our videos will be uploaded, personal videos, shows, everything uncensored. Definitely no more of the social media platforms with the censorship and this tech tyranny. Let's send them a message and start just doing our own thing, going our own way. We don't need them. We need the connection. We don't need them. That's for sure. We do need to know what's going on our planet. We do need to know if we're being predated on and whatnot. So, yep, there's been so much secrecy and disinformation over the last 100 years that it's become impossible to prove anything in the face of official denial. Exactly. Jack is back. Oh man, so do you really? I was just saying how I don't buy the excuse anymore that they say, oh, people are going to go crazy if they tell the truth. So I just
Right.
don't understand why that's always the excuse that they think the world's going to go crazy. Like, we're going to be held back from technological advancement,
Mhm.
medical advancement, spiritual advancement, because a few people may go crazy. I'm not buying that.
Yeah, I think originally back in 47 going into the 50s, they were that was during the extreme Cold War and all of that. And I think that they were worried about somehow upsetting the balance of society. Like, it's such an affrontal attack on most people's belief systems that they sometimes act out in crazy ways. And on top of that, they were worried that nobody would get up the next day and drive to work because, what use is that when in the face of an alien presence? But today, no, we've
Probably
been
wouldn't.
so desensitized to it that I think most people already believe it. Um, I think that what it's really going to come down to is if we can determine what their real motive is here. Because I point this out to a lot of people. It looks as though they've developed a lot of their technology in order to remain unseen by us. And yeah, we see them from time to time, but that's because these beings also make mistakes. And we have to consider that. What could the motive be behind a group of beings who don't just land and say, "Hi guys, here we are, and this will make you immortal, and you can grow
Right,
this,
yeah.
will be the only thing"? They don't do that. They conceal themselves. And the only reason you conceal yourself in the military is because you're concealing a weakness of some kind.
That's interesting.
And we need to point that out because otherwise they would just, we rule you, that's the way it is, and
Yeah,
yada,
right.
yada, yada. But they don't do that. And I've always found that to be a real strange curiosity. The other thing is them lighting themselves up so brightly in the sky. Now, we have animals on the earth which are, have biological luminescence, and they can produce these beautiful colors, under the ocean, and it's almost involuntary. And I've wondered if these things are somehow like that, where they just have to exude this kind of a light because all you're doing is bringing a huge amount of attention to an effort that you've spent eons trying to keep under wraps.
Wow. Well, I want to ask you now about a famous sighting. Before we went live, we didn't talk about it, but we were going to bring it up. So I think now is probably a good time with
Sure.
shapeshifters and all that, because that somehow does tie into this. So
It does, really dogmen and shapeshifters are almost like two different subjects, but they tie into one another in really interesting ways. And with the Sasquatch phenomenon. So with dogman and werewolves, what you have is an identical mirror-like occurrence to the Bigfoot phenomenon. And by that, I mean in Bigfoot, we have a never ending stream of highly credible eyewitnesses, some of which are emergency personnel who are trained to be the best observers out there. We have a long running, hundreds of years old indigenous oral history of the creatures. And we have physical evidence being left at the scene of sightings in the form of footprints. Simply, some of them could not be faked because they have epidermal ridges, which are microscopic and only be picked up under laboratory conditions. So we know there were striations in the skin. There's tree structures. They've left DNA that we've collected. And with dogmen, you have exactly the same thing. You have a never-ending stream of highly credible witnesses. You have an ancient oral history explaining these creatures. and they're leaving physical evidence at the scene in the form of footprints. And I have it from a very highly credible source that some of that DNA has been collected in the form of hair, and it was in fact analyzed.
Wow, they haven't got the results back yet?
They have, and that was the most amazing thing to me about it, was that the similarities were scary. So the mother's lineage ends up being just like the Sasquatch DNA, Homo sapiens sapien. It's
Us.
part modern human. The Y paternal DNA appears to be a construction of various different kinds of gene sequences all fused together in such an advanced way that the people who looked at it were both amazed and very, very scared by what they were looking at.
Like, how could this be created? Like, this can't
Right.
be created through nature, could it?
No, not at all. Now we are right now in the United States and Japan, a couple other places. We are practicing chimera work, where you fuse the genes of one animal into another that normally wouldn't be able to reproduce. Right. That is what my unified field theory talks about. That these things, both through their DNA, all the oral history, all of that, appear to be genetic chimera constructions from something that was not a human intelligence, simply because of the advanced nature of the genetics themselves.
Incredible. That picture too that you provided in your book, Paranormal Planet, which I highly recommend. It's an amazing book. It's the first book I ever read that had actual pictures, investigations, firsthand accounts. And that book from the picture that from the back of the car of the dog man, just incredible.
Yeah, that was probably the scariest picture I ever took. I call that the dogman of the Lost Creek Wilderness, if that doesn't sound ominous enough. But Lost Creek Wilderness is a place I identified as a major crossing point, migratory crossing point, where if Bigfoot creatures were on this particular side and they were trying to get to this particular side of the mountains, which is where all the water supply is, they would have to pass through this very narrow area, and that's known as the Lost Creek Wilderness. So I spent a lot of time out there and long distance filming basically B-roll. We're filming an area where an incident had occurred. And in one of the frames, way off in the distance, is just this pitch black figure. And we're like, what is that? And so we blew that up about 800%. And that face popped out. And that was the scariest face any of us had seen. Even J.C. Johnson looked at me and he goes, what is that? And it is elongated snout. It's got the upright ears. It was standing, because we went and measured it later, at about 10 feet. And the most amazing thing is that it's got a right arm and it's bent in a 90-degree angle in front of its pectoral muscles. And you can clearly see it. I mean, it's just amazing, this thing.
When you think that that's sharing the woods with you while you're doing all that, like, it's a kind of a mind F, because you think that that thing could easily have killed me if it was
easily
wanted to. If it was here for that, it would have.
Yep, easily. And people don't realize, when you've had a couple of actual field experiences when you've seen a Sasquatch, it's not the size that puts the fear of God into people. It's the speed. You cannot believe that any animal that can be 8-9 feet tall, weigh 1,000 pounds, can move so fast that it's like a blur.
They say it's like it glides, just.
It's so fast, and you think to yourself, there's no animal on Earth that can run that fast. You know, some of the fastest over uneven terrain are brown bears, and they can do 35, maybe a little more miles per hour through brutal, harsh terrain. These things would leave one of those animals in the dust. And, you know, and if you scare one, I've mentioned this before because we followed all the broken trees, but you scare one in an area, and I swear 10 minutes later, it's 2 miles away through heavy bush. And so people are always like, well, how come you don't have any remains and this and that and the other? Well, we've had teams in some of the deepest, darkest areas that you can get to in the United States, and we've never even come across a bear carcass. And there's thousands and thousands of them out there. So either they're doing something with their dead. In ancient cultures, they would often eat their dead as a way of absorbing their knowledge and power. It's practiced in a lot of world cultures, but I also do have a Native American eyewitness who claims to me that he saw them bury one of their own, then pick up a huge boulder and place it right on top. He was a Navajo gentleman watching them from up on a bluff down into an area, but refuses to reveal where it was because they're holy creatures there. So,
wow. You know, I've had dreams about Bigfoots, and every time I did, I'm like, I don't want to wake up. I don't know. They're always really strange, but
yeah.
Interesting. I want to hear about this shapeshifter incident.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me with the shapeshifters. We've had a couple of cases on the Navajo reservation in New Mexico. And one of those cases, sightings kept occurring, finally picked up a track of what appeared to be dog prints. And we're following them. And there's like a big copse of woods we're finally getting to. And all of a sudden, in one stride, it turned into a human print.
That's like the X-Files episode.
We were just like, we couldn't believe it. You know, we were just amazed by that, right? But that being said, I'm really undetermined about shape shifting in general. And I'll give you an example. So somebody I consider to be the most credible cryptozoologist out there had a sort of a meeting with different elders of a native tribe, trying to get them to give him permission to go examine some of these areas they didn't want people in. And during this conversation, all of a sudden, the other men, their faces turned white and they jumped up as fast as they can and backed up against the room. And this guy is standing there just looking at them like, what in the hell is wrong with these people? And what did they do? They didn't give me the peyote. That's probably what he's thinking, right? And all of a sudden, their faces kind of got normal again, and they started looking at each other. And every one of them swore to a T that man turned into a bear right in front of their eyes. Now, that led me to the idea that this may be a type of psychic ability where you can project that type of thing into another's mind and not exactly take the form.
Wow, that I haven't even thought of that.
Yeah,
and that would be, yeah.
Right. And see, another case I have came from New Mexico, which I think kind of confirmed it, was that this family reported that there was a group of shapeshifters outside of their property who jumped the fence and were pounding on the doors and stuff. But they, these creatures are described to being 9 feet tall and massive, muscular. They didn't have the strength to even kick in the door.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was like human strength, but with everybody seeing these gigantic things. Now, in the Navajo culture, they're referred to as Naagladoshi. That's the word that they use. You never, ever use the word skinwalker or Naagladoshi to any Navajo that you're not extremely well acquainted with on a friend, family friend kind of level. They will kick you out every time. It's evil to even say the word. But in their culture, skinwalkers are actually a cult of witches, long-running cult of witches who hold this tradition alive. Now, to be in one of these covens, you have to commit a really heinous act. Now, that heinous act usually is described as the murder of a family member. It's done in the presence of other cult members who are recording it or just being witnesses of it. The knowledge of you having done that will ensure that you will always be a part of the group, and any chance of you leaving that'll be held over you, and you're going to go to jail for murder. That's how they keep people in these groups. Now, I can tell you that whatever secret they have, whatever power that they've been able to harness in these ancient witchcraft cults appears to be real. And I can tell you that there are other groups, other occult groups who practice those kinds of practices, who have for a very long time held the knowledge of how they're doing that to be the greatest secret right now on the planet.
Wow. Because I feel like there's a lot of covens popping up. Like, I feel like this is becoming a thing people are being attracted to almost.
Right. And it's just because you're in a state where there's no real, direction. And there's a lot to be learned from the mysteries, as long as, I've seen a lot of people that get so involved that they end up taking a nosedive with occult assistance, if you will.
Yeah. Well, they get attracted to the power instead of the other aspect of it.
Right. Instead of the knowledge of it. So, that does bring us back to Antarctica, because I was going to bring something up that's actually kind of positive. So, Cliff over at the Webbot has stated that, and you have to remember that these sequences on the Antarctica go back for 5 years, 6 years, where it was beginning to pick up these things about an excavation there. Well, he predicts this year a lot of the technology that has been discovered there is going to be introduced into the public. And he calls this the emergence of sci-fi world. There's going to be some really amazing things happen. One of the byproducts of that, which I find interesting because it trickles down through society, is that most of these technologies, even like the ones we have today with solar panels, require vast amounts of silver in order to reproduce.
How interesting. Coin shortage.
Right. And so there's not much silver left. According to estimates, 50% of all the silver on the planet's already been used up, right?
Wow.
So it's one of those things where, you'll see this like new technology pop out, but the price of silver will be so high that like your phone's going to cost you $4,000.
Right. Yes.
It's going to be kind of like that, but they can't reproduce it without it. And so that he says that, next couple of months, you're going to start hearing little blips and clips in mainstream media, just kind of getting people warmed up to, hey, maybe something's going on,
Wow. So now I remember too, you mentioned in your video, again, I recommend everyone check it out. Paranormal Intelligence Agency. Jack just did a video on Antarctica and Mars. Their base is kind of being exposed, right? Under the melting ice. And were they Nazi bases? Did the Nazis have a base in Antarctica?
That is a really good question. So the only evidence really that we have that they may have gone to Antarctica and had enough technology, I suppose, packed onto U-boats, which don't pack a lot of stuff on them, to sort of rebuild. And they did a lot of extensive researching there before they put a base down there. And a lot of people think that the explorers found some underground caverns which a lot of people believe now have warm water running through them and could have life forms, plant even type of life forms, which would have given them an opportunity to do so. There is one photo from Google Earth of Antarctica where it clearly shows this dome-shaped door with rivets all over it, and it was covering up this big entrance to a cave, but it looks like the door has been slightly opened and the rest of it like deserted. Like, it seems like a remnant. But what we do have is Admiral Byrd and his project Paperclip, and they used it as a premise to go down and run Arctic drills in a place where we would never, ever need to have a war.
And you can't have a war there anyways. It's neutral territory.
Yeah. Right. So he gets this whole battle group, gigantic battle group, and they go down to Antarctica. And when they come back, half the ships are limping back, can barely make it back. They have been beaten up. And it wasn't until a few TV interviews later on that he made a very curious statement about the United States being threatened by what appear to be highly advanced aircraft that would come from the poles. That's what he told them. So a lot of people kind of have a split off. They think that some of this Martian culture was still discovered underneath miles of ice and somehow have managed to survive a little bit there. And a lot of people believe that the Nazis are still operational there, although I don't think there's any present day evidence to suggest that those colonies or bases, survived.
Wow. And I recently saw videos. I take these kinds of things with a grain of salt. And Michael Sala, he actually shared it, and it was supposedly of beings in stasis, like and they were supposedly from Antarctica. Think anything like that's really true that they found, maybe bodies
in stasis? Are you talking about a particular female? Did she look?
It was two males, but supposedly they were in like glass chambers with like burial stuff around them. Like they were like Egyptian looking wearing like Egyptian stuff, like looking stuff.
No,
I'll send it to you. What I'm referring to.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Now there is an interesting video going around that they call the Mona Lisa of the moon. I've not been able to trace the source of this. And if it didn't come from Hollywood and somebody spent a lot of money on something that they knew they weren't getting any money back on, it's an interesting video. And supposedly it was taken by some Apollo 11 astronauts when they landed there. But it clearly shows what looks to be a half woman, half alien creature laying in some sort of cryogenic stasis. And
that's what it is, cryogenic. I was trying to think of the word. I couldn't think of it.
Yeah. And they got some really good close-up photographs of her. And I've gone back to researching it again because I'm trying to find the exact source of that very first, whoever put it out initially, so that I can investigate that person, because it's often more valuable to investigate the person behind the image than it is the image themselves.
Wow, this conversation has been amazing. Honestly, I'm so glad you came back and we did this. Just incredible. Again, you're listening to Truth, Freedom, and Sophia. My guest is Jack Cary. I recommend everyone go out and order this book. It's about $20. Paranormal Planet. It's worth it for sure. And I want to just thank Jack for coming back. And Jack, do you want to say anything to our viewers before we sign off?
Guys, I put out videos on these subjects. If you just type in my name, Jack Cary, into any search engine, all my stuff will pop up, including my website. You click that website, there's a YouTube tab, takes you right to the YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You're listening to On the Wake Up Radio. Remember, you can catch all of our shows live on onthewakeupradio.com. Catch our replays at Google and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook. Support us on PayPal /onthewakeupradio at gmail.com. Also, OTWTube is our new website streaming. Please check it out. And Cash App with $ on the Wake Up Radio. Again, find us on thewakeupradio.com. Thanks for watching Truth, Freedom, and Sophia.